Hello, welcome everyone. We're gonna get started in just a minute, waiting for more folks to flow into the room. Great. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Welcome to the closing conversation of If You Grind the Threshold of Three Houses with AIM alum and current Bronx Museum artist in residence, Bang Geul Han, and curator Monika Fabijanska. Thank you for joining today's talk. I'm Angelica Pomar and I work with the Education Department at the Bronx Museum of the Arts, and I'm here to introduce today's conversation. In light of the recent Supreme Court leak overturning Roe v. Wade, today's talk, both Han and Fabijanska, will focus on Han's recent works, exploring the intersection of reproductive rights, abortion laws, and questions of race and class in relation to wider questions of relationships between text, desire, power, and representation. If You Grind the Threshold is Han's first museum solo show in New York. Through a diverse array of media, from weaving to artificial intelligence, the exhibition explores and unravels the desires and libidinal investments at work within select legal documents, government memoranda, and written spoken words by figures in positions of power. Bang Geul Han is an interdisciplinary artist working across video, performance, text, and code. Born and raised in Seoul, Korea, her work has been shown in venues including AAR Gallery, the Bronx Museum of the Arts, Cucho Fricho's Gallery, Doosan Gallery, New York, Nurture Art, Queens Museum in New York City, Gallery Les Territories and Prahi Pandi in Montreal, and International Center for Contemporary Art in Rome. Han is the recipient of a number of artist residencies and fellowships, including the Block Gallery Artist Residency and the Artists in the Marketplace AIM program at the Bronx Museum of the Arts, Lower Manhattan Cultural Council's Workspace Program, AAR Fellowship, MacDowell Fellowship, Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture, and Center for Emerging Visual Artists in Philadelphia, PA. Han received her MFA in Electronic Integrated Arts from NYSCC at Alfred University and BFA in Painting from Seoul National University in Korea. She lives and works in New York City. Monika Fabijanska is an independent art historian and curator based in New York City, who specializes in women's and feminist art. In 2021, she curated critically acclaimed Betsy Damon Passages, Rites, and Rituals at La Mama Galleria, mentioned among the New York Times best shows of 2021. Her Ego of Feminisms at Thomas Urban Gallery in 2020 featured the works by Agnes Dinnis, Lynn Hirschman Leeson, Mary Mattingly, Anna Mendieta, Cecilia Vicuña, etc., and was reviewed in Art in America, the New York Times, the Brooklyn Rail, Hyperallergic, and Flash Art, among others. Groundbreaking, The Unheroic Act, Representations of Rape in Contemporary Women's Art in the US, was shown at the Shiva Gallery in John Jay College in 2018, and was ranked the 5th best NYC art show in 2018 by Hyperallergic. Accompanied by a catalog and symposium, it featured works by Bang Geul Han, Lynn Hirschman Leeson, Jenny Holzer, Suzanne Lacey, Anna Mendieta, Segna Negundi, Yoko Ona, and Carol Walker. Fabijanska provided the initiative and curatorial consulting for the Museum of Modern Art acquisition and retrospective exhibition of Alina Shupachnikov in 2012. Fabijanska is a member of the College Art Association's Committee on Women in the Arts. So for today's talk, we will spend around 40 minutes in conversation and then leave about 20 minutes at the end for Q&A. So if you have any questions, please type it in the Q&A function found at the bottom right corner of your screen. Also, please note today's talk will be recorded and uploaded to the Bronx Museum Education's YouTube channel. With all that being said, I'd like to now turn it over to Monika and Bang Geul, who will begin today's conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Angelica. Thank you very much to the Bronx Museum for inviting us to have this conversation, inviting me to to guide the audience through Bang Geul Han's incredibly important exhibition. I am in the Bronx, where I live, which is the land of the Lenape people. It was, it is, and it will be. And also, it's a very personal moment for me, because as you noted, if anybody listens to the bios, I featured Bang Geul Han's work in 2018 exhibition about rape in contemporary women's art. It was exactly at the Bronx Museum where I first saw this work. I remember coming to the biennial, and I recommend it to anyone to check whenever the museum presents the AIM biennial, because it's a fantastic opportunity to come across young artists in New York City who are extremely talented and often not represented by commercial galleries. So this is where I first saw the work. I invited Bang Geul to present it within my show, and it gained quite wide acclaimed. It was mentioned in, I think, all the reviews. It's a very poignant work, which bases on text representation in terms of visual quality. But this text is a paragraph from infamous Access Hollywood tapes of Donald Trump, in which he speaks about grabbing women by the pussy. As you probably all remember, it was leaked by the New York Times in October 2016 and became a huge issue in the last weeks of that election. And what Bang Geul Han did was, using this paragraph and the letters that we saw on the screen in the generative that she created, would disperse through the screen and then come back again to form the tweets of women who in thousands reacted in horror to Access Hollywood tapes. So importantly, when we had a symposium during that exhibition, with most of the artists in the show included, and you participated in that symposium. The symposium actually occurred on the day, I think, when Brett Kavanaugh presented his position in front of US Senate Judiciary Committee, defending himself from the accusation of Dr. Blasey Ford, who accused him of sexual abuse when they were both in school. It was a very powerful moment to have a symposium exactly at that time and be reminded how threatened the situation, even in such a country as the United States, is. So it would be very apt to sort of start today from where we ended the last time, and with your comment on Brett Kavanaugh.
Should I share the work first, or
you can share the work first? You can discuss it first.
Okay. So yeah, I remember that moment very clearly, I think, and then just kind of watching it and kind of having this sort of visceral sensation of having to look away constantly, but also trying to bear witness at the same time. So it's kind of like this inner conflict of like this visceral reaction of repulsion, as well as responsibility or conviction to hear his words. But I think that moment, this is kind of interesting how I work, or I think a lot of artists work the same way, like how the mind sort of forms this kind of connection, where during the this was actually close to when Amy Coney Barrett was being confirmed. Actually, I went out for a walk, and then with my partner, and my partner started talking about Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the movie from 70s. And I don't really like horror movies, so he knew that I would not watch it, so he started talking about the movie. And then this was supposed to be a comedy, so he was kind of constantly, gleefully kind of describing this horror scene, as well as making jokes. But like, I started having this very, very uncomfortable feeling in my gut about, why is this not funny to me? Why is this kind of listening to how these women's body being mutilated and being kind of tortured by this group of men are just not funny to me anymore. And then it kind of reminded me of that moment of Brett Kavanaugh talking about how hard he worked as a person and he deserves this, and somebody trying to ruin his chance, his rightful moment. And I think that's where I kind of thought I need to do something about this sensation of seeing that video, witnessing that video, but as well as somehow take it apart in my own way. So I'm going to share the video now. So this was like basically a 1 minute excerpt from 44 minutes video. And 44 minutes is the entire length of his opening statement. And yeah.
I think it's quite amazing how you really translated your own sense of visceral reaction to hearing this text, but also looking at this deposition. I have the same. I really can't watch it. And I had this moment yesterday at the museum when we were speaking about this work, and even though I sort of knew that, I had to ask you again, are these really his words, or did you appropriate some other text and used it here?
I know. And then I was like, no, this is what he exactly said. I'm using his words as like verbatim. So
it's kind of difficult to imagine. So the actual work in the exhibition at the Bronx Museum, as the audience can see, is a 2-channel or 2-screen in that case video, where the account of Texas chain massacre is seen on one and Brett Kavanaugh's statement on the other.
Right. So I think for me, it was like I had a lot of different versions of this video. And I ended up deciding to leave his words in his face kind of as raw as possible, as bare as possible. But then kind of create this in a way, very perverse intervention of silencing his voice and turning into some kind of lobby style announcement, but also, that kind of reminiscent of Instagram post, with the colorful background, with the kind of this very bold type, sort of like something that I can bear it, but also reducing his words to something not as important as what he's, meant to. I don't know. It's always really difficult to talk about this kind of thing.
You often interfere with film materials, with existing found footage and the text there. We're not gonna go that deep to analyze all of your works, but I hope that will whet the appetite of those who are listening. I actually also think when I look at this, I'm thinking of early silent movies where there are text screens because the films are silent, right? And very often they interpreted women's feelings. So she thought this and this, or she did this and this. And we're like, well, what did she really think? And we are already touching what really is the core of our conversation, not only how incredibly timely your work and this huge body of work on view now at the Bronx Museum regarding reproduction laws, but also reproduction rights, but also your investment and your interest in language and in text as a medium of art, among other things. So I think we will be closing on the next work where you use letters alone, this time with no image, or as I should rather speak, the language alone. So I'd like you to discuss this one. It's titled Bamboo Forest.
Right, so this one is called Bamboo Forest, where I have been collecting this rituals and recipes around abortion and contraception. I think abortion and contraception is actually really, really intricately connected, as everybody know, unlike what Supreme Court justice, tried us to believe that they are separate issue, but it's actually completely connected. And sometimes there's no real clear line between them. So when I was looking for rituals and mostly pre-modern, because that was like before the safe abortion was available, but at the same time, these abortions were happening from, ancient Egypt, ancient Greek to throughout the, the contemporary. So I was like really interested in what women did, but also how did this stories got translated through time. And I was looking for that kind of really interesting poetic moments that sometimes happens if we're trying to like translate the ancient, Egyptian hieroglyphs into like the contemporary language. And so I have been collecting, I'm still collecting. So whenever I find another one, I put it in to the database, and then it will, the program basically pulls those the rituals and then kind of goes through them. And I also recorded me speaking this, but very like whispering, because all these things were basically sort of suppressed knowledge that has been, that's why I think it's been kind of difficult for me to, it took 2 years basically to collect about 100 of them, because they were very somewhat difficult to find them. So it's covering like ancient Egypt, ancient Japan, China, all the way to like, South America. I'm just gathering whatever that I can. And then what happened is that all these letters kind of when they come together, it kind of actually forms the paragraph that was spoken by Henry J. Hyde. He is famous for the author of the Hyde Amendment, who which basically bars federal funding from being used for abortion. And it is I think it's a one way to think about the issue of against like abortion, this anti-abortion legislation is against women, but it's not just that, it's also against, it is also very racist and classicist act, because he admits it in 1993 during the House floor debate, where he says, rich white women can get abortion whenever she can. We can't do anything about that, but we can at least save poor people's babies, poor unborn babies. And he says, that's what I'm trying to do. And he just clearly admits that that's his intention. And I think that has been always the question of race and question of class has always been really a core of the issue surrounding the abortion. I mean, I can talk more about it, but I'm going to show the work first.
And the Hyde Amendment is 1976, right?
It was first devised in 1976, became effective in 77. And then people wanted to put exception in incest and rape, and also women's well-being and health exception to the clause. The rape and incest clause, I think, got put in 93, but then the women's well-being and health was not added. So that happened 93. Okay, so
Interesting when I'm hearing now to this whisper in the video and the content of those mostly hopes
right.
rather than methods of ancient women. I'm also thinking of something very interesting, that Roe versus Wade was granted on the basis of the women's right to privacy.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
And a lot of people think that, that was wrong, that, it was not supposed, it was like too weak of a constitutional right that was attached, and therefore that's why this is happening right now. But I do think the rights to privacy, and actually the 14th Amendment, as a whole, is actually really, really important in terms of like the autonomy of the body, but also kind of going back to slavery, and that they couldn't control their body, but also they couldn't plan their family life. And that was really integral to abolishing of the slavery and being able to control their family, be able to plan their family and where they can live and how they will raise it. So it's really unfortunate to me that they are saying like, oh, 14th Amendment is like, it doesn't guarantee any of these rights to your bodily autonomy. So.
And we're reaching the nitty-gritty of the exhibition this way, because your exhibition and the whole, this is, maybe we didn't say enough at the beginning in terms of introduction. It's a whole body of work where each of them is devoted to reproduction rights and the ways they are undermined. But in their essence, all the works touch on the aspects of intersectionality, where the reproduction rights are enmeshed, or the ways that they are trying to be, the ways that they are being limited are enmeshed with other legal attempts at limiting the rights of people of color or of immigrants, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that this is a good juncture how we can move to the threshold, which is in a way how we enter the works, right? Almost physically.
Yeah, when you enter the exhibition, this is the first thing you see. So, so yeah, this piece is basically, it's kind of like a modern representation of this very classic Korean hanok gate. So Korean like traditional building style from 13th to 19th century is called hanok, and they still build it. They're artisans. It's not like that tradition got ended, but it's like classically uses wood and ceramic tiles and things like that. And the stylistically, the curve is like I think the unique part of that, the hanok style, where it resembles mountains and sky, and I think that that's kind of the reminiscent of the Korean style. But this directly relates to that abortion ritual I found of the, if you grind. So during Joseon dynasty in Korea, the courtesans really, they didn't have reliable abortion or contraception. So they had this list of things they did, and one of it they believed was that if you grind the threshold of 3 other houses or a stick of a thief and then ingest it, then it will cause abortion. And which is quite interesting, because the threshold in Korea has carries a very symbolic meaning. And it's not just that, people don't believe it now that, we know it's just a threshold. Even when I was growing up, if I stepped on one of the threshold, my mom would say, don't do it. Or my grandmother would tell me off and say, it's a bad luck. Don't, you shouldn't do that. So it is this kind of very pervasive, I think, belief that stepping on the threshold is it will bring upon a bad luck, because you are disrupting this kind of natural state of something that delineates between different spaces. And so sometimes it could mean nature versus indoor, between women's quarter to men's quarter, and between life and death. And so when I heard about this, when I heard about
tell us what happens when we step on your threshold.
Yeah. Sorry, there is someone outside my window, literally defecating. So I just can't. Sorry, I might I have to calm down. Okay, let's.
Is everything okay?
Yeah, everything is okay. So I just want to show the. Should I talk about the LED?
Show it first.
Show it first. Okay, I'll show it first.
And you can talk over it, because this video doesn't have, it's just a documentation, so it doesn't have its own sound.
So this is all made in wood, but actually the threshold itself, although it looks like wood, underneath there is a LED panel that's kind of almost like embedded. So it has, it kind of scrolls this text, and you can read it like Justice age 5 months, assaulted by, let me just watch it. So what this is scrolling is that it's a text from a spreadsheet that Office of Refugee Resettlement kept between 2017 and 2019 in order to maintain the control over pregnant undocumented minors. And whenever they request abortion, then they would I read that they would sometimes send their staff members to discourage the minors from having an abortion. And you can see it's basically a very like it's just really cold. Like there's no real human trail in a way. They are kind of reduced to almost like
statistical data.
Yeah, statistical data, but also the whole purpose of their existence is really just to carry this baby.
Can you show us the statistics from which you took it?
So
yeah, exactly.
This is the spreadsheet. And you can see
it's something that interested me a lot, because I noticed that the same problem exists, for example, in Poland with Ukrainian refugees crossing the border now. As we know, Ukraine is one of the first countries that had legal abortion on request, while Poland is one of those that prefer Middle Ages approach, and it bans abortion almost entirely. So there's a huge issue with women who are pregnant and who are crossing the border and for some reason would like to get abortion, and their organization is helping them. I looked at the statistics when I was recently in the country, but I also know the reality of migrants crossing the American border after the travel that you take from, let's say, Salvador or Honduras all the way through Mexico to the border of the United States. And if you are a woman or a queer person, what are the chances that you will not be raped? I mean, it's not, of course, all these cases are the cases of rape, but they are highly problematic. So the level to which the state would like to have control over the sufferance is just incredible.
Yeah, and there's a direct, evidence of basically them saying, even if they took the first dose of the, usually the medical abortion is in 2 steps, you get first pill that blocks the progesterone, and then second pill that induces the cramp. And this is a memoranda that's sent out in 2017, the ORR, even if the minor took the first pill, they should be considered this kind of very controversial, dangerous abortion reversal treatment. And then on the right is actually, now I'm bringing back the Justice Kavanaugh again. So in 2017, one of these minors was trying to get an abortion. ACLU sued on behalf of her because she was keep getting denied. And then and they won, but then Kavanaugh court basically reversed that decision. Then it got reversed again in the appeals court. So Kavanaugh wrote this very, very fiery dissenting opinion, which is you're seeing on the right here.
Can you read it?
I just highlighted the today's majority decision, by contrast, substantially adopts the panel dissent, and is ultimately based on a constitutional principle as novel as it is wrong: a new right for unlawful immigrant minors in US government detention to obtain immediate abortion on demand. thereby barring any government efforts to expeditiously transfer the minors to their immigration sponsors before they make that momentous life decision. So he's basically saying a new right for unlawful immigrant minors, meaning that, yes, because of the Roe v. Wade, it is legal. He actually says that later. It's legal for American citizens to have a constitutional right to abortion, but she's not a legal citizen. She's unlawful immigrant minors. Therefore, this is like sending a new right because the constitutional right does not extend. Now he's obviously going to step back on what he wrote, but in terms of the Roe v. Wade. But it's really interesting, that kind of intersection of who gets protected, whose body, whose right, who's it's protected.
At the same time, it also presents the objective difficulty in meandering through the legal systems that are not similar in many countries, that have many loopholes, and also the developing knowledge of people of what actually contraception is, where the life begins. I mean, this quarrel the argument will probably never be solved. Therefore, there should be choice for those who are directly affected, who are pregnant. As simple as this. Right. We can discuss until the end of the world who is right, but maybe not everybody has the right to take the decision of somebody else on behalf of somebody else, right? Mm-hmm. But what's really chilling in all of this is the enmeshing of all of these efforts with control over people of color. And the next work in your exhibition, which is called Warp and Weft, is your direct analysis that took you incredible time, really, of this, and also a very interesting approach to presenting it. So could you discuss this one?
Yeah. So I think this work actually started. Sorry that I'm gonna turn back a little bit, that I was looking at, like, there has been an incredible movement in South Korea in terms of feminist movement. And there also has been incredible backlash against that by young Korean men. And I watched this young Korean man talking in TikTok about how women are wrong. They say they're feminists, but they're actually just a lazy bitches. That's what it says. They're lazy. They didn't learn how to rear their children, and therefore they can't, do anything. They cannot succeed. And it kind of reminded me of actually a Cliven Bundy's remark about the Black people, that, how they didn't learn how to pick cotton, and that's the issue. And they became lazy, and, that. And I was just realizing that this huge, like, striking similarity between those rhetorics and how people use such logic and in different contexts. So when I look at it, the abortion also here. So what I did was that I collected all the states that have very restricted abortion policies. There are about 28 states that will go into incredibly restrictive abortion or completely ban abortion in the state, which is, over majority, obviously. And so I collected all their actual state codes, going through their state website and then searching through, specific sections that regards the abortion. Then I printed them out, sliced them all line by line, and then glued them, and then turn it into a long strand that then I can feed into the loom. Then I kind of wove them together with a Supreme Court opinions about Voting Rights Act. So this one is the 3 different cases that literally has been, they just left the kind of shell, but literally gutted inside of the Voting Rights Act that supposed to protect the states from enacting racist voting practices. And almost it kind of, especially Shelby County versus Holder from 2013, literally made the Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act unenforceable by any measure, therefore almost meaningless. And then, but that started from 2000 in Bruno versus Bossier Parish School Board, which also left that, Section 5 wide open, which became completely gutted by Shelby County versus Holder. And then in 2022, Merrill versus Milligan shadow docket case that, the Justice Kavanaugh also wrote concurring opinion of, further made it clear that that one was about Section 2 of the more general terms of the Voting Rights Act. So yeah, it's kind of like I'm trying to like literally creating a fabric, in a way that affects people's body and people's ability to move and control their own autonomy.
It's a literal illustration of intersectional.
Yeah, like in a way.
It's kind of incredible.
But I thought, is this work too literal? But
no.
I was explaining.
No, your works are always, I think, I'm very happy that we're having this conversation precisely for the reason that your works are not so easily accessible for the audience. They require time, they require reading, they require digesting into the text that is presented, because you do obscure body with the text, with the narrative. That's your main strategy.
So this is just because, as you said, it is not many people actually realize that it is a text, because it looks more like some sort of fabric, and then so I always like kind of have to bring them like closer to the work, and they're like, oh, it is actually text, we can actually read a little bit about it. But clearly, because it's all like woven together, it's difficult to read. But I think you can kind of see where it says Supreme Court of the United States.
And I think it's also a parallel to reality, because these laws are so many and so complex, and because it's a federal state where every state has their thing to say, for an average person, law is very complex system that people are lost in, and that makes them more vulnerable to the states and to these laws.
I think that's another thing about like kind of these obscure language. Like I had to read like several times of that Justice Kavanaugh's dissenting opinion just to understand it, that what he's saying, because he kept saying like, yes, the women can have abortion because of the Roe v. Wade precedent. And then I'm like, okay, then why are you blocking it? And so it's like the reasoning and all this, and especially Merrill versus Milligan, is so complicated. I don't really understand it, to be honest, but I just had to listen to what, read what other people wrote about it, because it's so buried in this kind of technicality of how that's related to voting rights. But so that obscurity and the kind of seeming sort of distance between these texts and the body, I think that's why I decided to kind of play with this object with my body, kind of touching it, and how it's kind of in everyday kind of surrounding. But also in this case, I wanted to make a blanket that will blanket my body, but also it looks like I'm sort of like slightly oblivious. I'm peacefully sleeping with it, with this kind of restrictive law that they may control the ability for me to freely exercise my rights.
You're sleeping with white patriarchy here. It looks like. I didn't say that. So I'm looking at the watch, and I know we had very ambitious plans of giving a little bit of an insight into Bang Geul's other works, but maybe we'll do that other time. I think that this is such an important work, body of work and time, that it would be more important to give our audience the opportunity to ask you questions rather than bringing even more into this very, very rich conversation already. So we'd like to invite everyone who would have a question to come up with it. I'm looking into the chat right now if we have questions there. But they're mostly comments.
Mm-hmm.
We have a question. Could you comment on the possible status of ancient, in parentheses, abortion and contraceptive recipes as a form of specifically female knowledge or discourse, something widely shared and granting female agency, yet simultaneously somewhat secret or under the radar of patriarchy?
I mean, I think there is that aspect of it true. You know, there is that kind of, okay, because I have always been interested in gossiping as a form of knowledge transfer. You know, it's something that is looked down upon. That's not an official channel of the kind of transferring information. But at the same time, I think there is that's like a way of going under the radar. And in a way that, you know, that's kind of like why I have always been interested in kind of gossip as not a negative term, but as a more positive term.
As a way of communication.
As a way of communication, but also as a way of going under the official radar and then disseminating knowledge that can only be disseminated without the official channel, or having to avoid the official channel.
Right. We have another question. Okay. What do you see as the limitations of the AI, which is probably in reference to another work in your exhibition, which we haven't had a chance to discuss even. The exhibition is really worth going up to the Bronx. And you will be giving, I will go back to the question, but I want to shout it to all our audience that you will be giving in-person walkthroughs on Saturday and Sunday this week, the closing weekend of the show at 2 p.m. So let's go to the question. What do you see as the limitations of the AI, and where would you like to see it grow? Do you think it acquired any gendered point of view or displayed any awareness of gender?
I think the goal was to actually raise the gendered point of view by putting the, because I think the idea of AI has been trained on this kind of 6 billion points of data points. And that a lot of those 6 billion data points point to the kind of more patriarchal kind of norm and heteronormative kind of text. So therefore, I think it's inherently gendered, really. And I think the idea of trying to give a life to AI and then give kind of identity as this kind of genderless, it's an object. It's a space junk that's kind of falling from the space, and it has like a different materiality, different life form. And I think the whole idea is like, how can we actually get out of the gendered boundary of that conversation? So in a way, like your question is, do you think it acquired any gender point of view? In my sense, it already has the gender point of view, but by training and fine tuning, I kind of lost some of that gender point of view, in my opinion.
In your work.
Did I answer your question, Christopher?
Hopefully.
Okay.
Yes, good.
Okay, great.
And you know, it's what I think about all of your works over the period of the last, over the period of the last, what, 5 years that I've known you, which is quite a long time already. And you really focus on language as a tool of oppression, as a norm that there are certain works, and we are not able, due to the time constraints, to discuss your remembering the Black Book in Seoul, but there are works in which you sort of pose gaze against the narrative, and you analyze how the narrative, how the cultural narrative, and by whom it is created, whose language is official, whose language is respected, forms the gaze that we then mirror or use as a society, how manipulated we are. Right. So your works really dig deeply into how gender is enacted, oppressed, and in other ways defined by language and through language.
Yeah, I think it's really rooted in my experience as an immigrant, who coming here and having to kind of learn the language, but language is not language by itself. It's like all the culture and references and histories that you don't possess. And really, I felt powerless for a very, very long time. Still, I don't feel 100% comfortable speaking English. And I think it is really interesting to kind of think about like how much, I think it's also, I'm just that kind of person always looking for like, is this the right way to do things? You know, is this the right way? Like kind of, I'm very law abiding person maybe. And then the language to me, it was like this law that I just cannot figure out. Like, I don't know what is right. I don't know what is wrong, you know, and it was such a perplexing kind of feeling of constantly doing something wrong. Like I'm always doing something wrong. I'm always saying something wrong. And I think that idea of law as this kind of this enforcer of something, but then I don't even know what it's enforcing. Like what is the right way? There's so many exceptions to the language, and it only can be possessed through years of like nuances and like, you know, context and all this thing. So therefore, like, but also I think then comes a freedom too. By not knowing the language very well, I have a freedom to just take it apart and do something with it without having to bog down by the history and the weight of the what is right and what is wrong. And I think the kind of like trying to use that sort of limitation and the pressure of being enforced in some way and being alienated, and like it's kind of my way of sort of carving out this little hole that I can then kind of dig and kind of make my own space within it. I think someone mentioned about like, you know, the idea of minor literature, of how like the using the kind of major language, but using to create your own culture, using that as a way of sort of deterritorializing the major kind of the oppressive language, and then turning into a collective voice as well as this kind of political voice.
You know, I hear you well. I'm an immigrant too, and it's not only, it would be impressive for anyone to put this body of work together, but I was specifically, when I saw it at the museum first and then the second time, I was specifically thinking that it's an incredible work for somebody who is from a culture that is not English speaking to dig through this immense bodies of English code, legal codes, but also for somebody who is from outside of that legal culture, because your country's legal culture is entirely different, right? So this is almost like endurance performance. I'm really impressed with the research that stands behind this body of work and the observations that, thanks to this deep research, you were able to make. I hope we have one more question, because we have time for another one. Does the title bamboo forest have a specific relevance? Wonderful question.
So the bamboo forest comes from this Korean folktale where like, I think it was a Kaya. This is kind of old ancient Korean kingdom. And the king had like very large ears. And then he was very embarrassed about it. And therefore he hired this crown maker to make a crown specifically to hide his large ears. And then said that if you say anything about my large ears, you're gonna die, you know? So he had to, like, he made the crown, and then the crown maker went back, and then he lived his life very quietly. But then he just had this like inkling of like, I just want to say something about this. Like, I can't die without saying something. So he went into the bamboo forest and then just shouted out, said, "The king has donkey ears. The king has donkey ears." He just like shouted in the forest alone. And then he came home, and then he was like, "Oh, now I'm peacefully, I can die." So he passed away. But after that, whenever there's a wind, the bamboo would make the sound that sounded like the king has donkey ears, king has donkey ears. So within like, you know, very short period of time, everyone in the country knew that the king had a donkey ear. So it kind of like has that resonance of people's secrets, and the truth is not going to actually buried. You know, there's always, it gets inscribed into the environment and somehow comes through. And I think that's the truth in this case, is that abortion has always existed. It's not some kind of modern invention. And I think it will always exist. So it, despite all this kind of oppression, systemic oppression that has been happening.
And also the fact that there are often double standards, meaning that people who are very opposed to abortion officially often either paid for it in their lives or had abortions done, but will never speak about it. So again, this notion of privacy, lie, secret, what is known, what is present, what is coded, because of course, until 19th century, abortion rights were not coded, essentially. I'm very happy that somebody asked this question because I had to, it was one of mine, but I omitted it for looking at the time and knowing how little time we have. But I wanted to make a comment that you are not the only Korean artist whom I know, of Korean descent, whom I know who uses fairy tales Korean fairy tales as an inspiration source. And it's very interesting because as I understand it, Korea is a country where there is no a dominant, centralized, organized religion. We're still, a fair portion of the society follows indigenous original beliefs that are not organized under any of those major religions. And therefore, my sense, and I'm actually asking you a question, is that because of that, this original fairy tales, these stories are so much more vivid and present within the society.
Maybe you're right, but also these stories do exist elsewhere. Like when I was doing research about this story, I realized that there is actually a very similar story exists in Persia. So it is really interesting that these almost like this kind of like universal in a way, these stories. And which makes sense in terms of like how the truth comes out and things like that. It must be universal. So I don't know how much of Korean society is kind of more what's imbued with this kind of folk tales, but definitely I grew up with it. You know, I always had read about it, but a lot of it is a kind of oral thing too. My grandmother told me, and then my mom told me. So there has always been this kind of full imbued experience of listening to these stories. And I also, like, I was talking about, like, the whole reason that I started collecting these rituals was that because, like, my partner would make fun of me kind of keeping certain superstitious beliefs. You know, I have my own rituals that I keep. And then he was like really kind of constantly made fun of me of, like, you know, why don't you do this? And then I'm like, no, you cannot do that in the afternoon. Like, that will bring up bad luck, you know?
Well, it makes all the sense. In the previous exhibition of yours, which you had at SFEFA in Philadelphia, the Center for Emerging Visual Artists, something like this, which I was happy to see as well. You had a whole work devoted to, also based on Korean fairy tales and folk tales as a rich source of traditions and information. Well, I think we reached that threshold, if I may say that, of 2:30, and we should turn the floor to Angelica Pomar.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bang Geul and Monika, for this really wonderful conversation. And congratulations again, Bang Geul, on a really fantastic show here at the Bronx Museum. And I'd like to quickly remind everyone in the audience that Bang Geul's exhibition closes this Sunday, May 15th. Admission to the museum is always free, and our hours this weekend are from 1 to 6 p.m. Also, like to remind everyone again that Bang Geul herself will be leading free drop-in artist-led tours for her show at 2 p.m. tomorrow and Sundays in the gallery.
Oh, I want to make an announcement just in case anybody in the audience who wants to actually come tomorrow. I know there's a big protest happening tomorrow about the abortion rights. So I encourage everyone to go to the protest and then come to my show later. And I will happily leave to give the guided walkthrough later in the afternoon. I'll be at the museum until much later, almost to 6. So yeah.
Wonderful. Amazing. And with all that being said, thank you again to everyone who joined us today, and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank
Thank
you
you so much.